Bonsoir. Today, great pleasure to tell you about L'Assommoir by Emil Zola. If you've been watching the channel, you know that I am a huge fan of Emil Zola. This is the third novel of his that I've read. Most famously, he wrote a series of 20 novels called the Rougon Macquart series. This is number 13 in the series. However, there is a difference between the publication order and the reading order. But for our purposes, I'm not going to be talking about the publication order. I'm going to be talking about the reading order. This is number 13 in that wonderful, enormous, heartbreaking French series of literature. I'm going to be telling you a little bit about the plot. The novel is over 400 pages, and I suppose I'm going to be talking about the first 150 pages, and I'll try to not spoil the book for you. If you haven't read it and you've never heard of it, and this video perhaps encourages you to read the book, well, I don't want to spoil the surprise for you. However, there will be some spoilers later, but I really don't like to do this in my videos. I want everybody to read the book with a feeling of fresh experience. So what I'll do when I get to the spoiler section of the video is I'll hold up this little bear, and while I'm holding up the little bear, that means that's the part of the video where you should cover your ears or just click ahead to the video where I'm not holding up the little bear. Okay? Fair enough? L'Assommoir. Chapter 1. We meet the protagonist. Her name is Gervaisie. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She is in a squalid, ugly, little down-and-out apartment room with her two children, Claude and Etienne. Talk about those two later. And she's waiting for the return of her boyfriend, Lantier. And Lantier has been out all night. And Gervaisie's been sitting by the window watching for him, waiting for him to come home because she has no food, she has no money. She's got a bunch of little pawn tickets because they have pawned all of their clothes. You know, these are the old times where people used to actually be able to pawn their old clothing. And there's a lot of it happening in this book, by the way. She's desperate. She is more desperate than, I think we can really imagine in today's world, that this kind of poverty, it belongs to that European era of 150 years ago. And by the way, she's in one of the dirtiest down and out parts of Paris. It's a slum, I guess you would call it. So what happens at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning when Lantier comes home? There's a big argument. There's a lot of shouting. The children are crying. Lantier says, "I've had enough." And he leaves. He takes his trunk and he departs, leaving her abandoned. No money, 2 kids, no food, no nothing. And she's quite sure that he's been out with another woman, not precisely a streetwalker, but near enough. And Lantier is a proper scumbag. He basically lives off of women in this fashion. He's all talk, he's quite polished, he seems to be very intellectual, he's always reading the newspapers. That's all he ever does with his life, is sit in the cafe reading the newspapers, talking about politics. And he looks around for a woman who seems to be well-to-do, strikes up a bit of a relationship with her, and when he's drained all of her money, he moves on. Gervaisie goes down to the local, it's really quite hard to imagine because it's very much of a bygone era. She goes to the local washing house where all the women are doing the washing from the local streets. She starts doing the washing because that's all she can do. And she sees Virginie. And Virginie is the sister of that streetwalker that Lantier ran off with. And Gervaisie and Virginie get into a brawl. These two women practically kill one another. They're clawing at each other. And in the end of the fisticuffs, Gervaisie is like whipping the ass of Virginie with, like, I don't know, some kind of a washing house equipment, showing her ass to everybody. And all the women are standing around. Some of them are horrified. A lot of them are cheering. They know that Gervaisie's justified because of Virginie's sister ran off with her man. And Virginie is so humiliated by this beating that she took publicly that she leaves the district. She comes back later. That's the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2, it's several weeks later. Gervaisie has got herself on her feet. She's become a washerwoman, which is one of the lowest positions in society, but it's what she's good at. If she washes clothes for 12 hours a day, she can make a little money to afford the rent and to keep her two boys in food. But she's sworn off men. Although there is this one fella, he's a roofer. His name is Coupeau. And Coupeau is very sweet on Gervaisie, and he sees that she's not like the other girls. She doesn't drink. She doesn't hang around with all the men who just say something nice and I'll buy a glass of wine and let's go. No, she's not like that. She's sober, she's industrious, and she just wants to make a life for herself. And Coupeau sees this, and he's good-natured, he's good-hearted, and he says, this is the kind of woman I want. I don't even mind that she has 2 children by another man. I will take care of her. And he tries. He really tries to get her to marry him. She doesn't want to. She had enough of men, but he's persistent, and one day he convinces her. He applies enough of his Parisian charm, I guess you would call it, and she consents to be his wife. Trouble immediately when they go to tell his sister and her husband, Coupeau's brother-in-law, that they go to his sister to say, I'm going to get married to this woman. And these 2 characters, aside from Lantier, the sister-in-law and the brother-in-law, are just the most horrible characters you're ever going to meet. They're so tight-fisted, complete misers, never want to pay for anything, never want to be charitable, never give anything away. So Coupeau takes Gervaisie to meet his sister. They're really quite horrible, awful, terrible people. They look at her and like, oh, well, is that the best you can do? She's already got 2 children from another man. Why, in the name of God, would you marry someone like that? You know, she works as a washerwoman. She's nothing special. She's got a limp. But Coupeau is, when it comes to his sister, he's very timid. He allows her to push him around. He's a bit of a softie. They get married. I think that's chapter 3. In chapter 3, there's this long, like all of chapter 3 is the description of the wedding. Here is where I want to say that this is the old style of writing, where there is a lot of long, drawn-out, luxurious description. Perhaps because the novel was published in serial form, chapter by chapter, so similar to Charles Dickens, that they were getting paid the more they wrote. So it was in their financial interest to write longer books. Personally, I like the more modern, succinct style, concentrated, without a lot of excessive description, but this is the old style, and I love it just as much, especially when it's done by a master like Emil Zola. So we get this long chapter about the wedding. First of all, they go to the courthouse, and they're all very poor, and they're told that they have to wait because other people are going to be married before them, and that makes them late to go to the church, and the priest is angry at them for being late. They're all quite unhappy because they see that he's rushing through the service and he's not really giving them their money's worth. Everything is about money in this book, by the way. And then after that, they've got several hours between the church service and where they can go to the restaurant for the dinner, the reception. And so what they do, this wedding party, is they go tramping around Paris on foot. In today's world, it's beyond belief, but if we go back 150 years, where very, very few people had cars, especially, like nobody has a car in this district because they're all so poor. And there's this amazing passage where this wedding party of these rather simple, crude, poor people go to the Louvre. And they go marching around the Louvre like a bunch of uneducated tourists. It's really quite funny that there's this one man in the party who, he's a bit of an intellectual, so he fancies himself. And he takes them all around, and of course they all like the smutty pictures, and they're all sniggering about that. But they just go tramping all over this enormous museum until they're completely exhausted. And then they eventually say, okay, all right, thank God we can go to the restaurant now, it's time. Fantastic. Perhaps you may not enjoy that as much as I did, but for me, it's emblematic of the old style of writing where there were these long descriptive passages where you wanted to get as much color and flavor and atmosphere as you possibly could, because that's what made good writing. Hemingway changed all that, but it doesn't discredit or devalue the good books of the 19th century, and this is absolutely one of them. Gervaisie, Coupeau, they're married. Coupeau He's working hard. He stays off the alcohol. He swears that he will never drink spirits. Every once in a while, he'll have a glass of wine because that's just healthy. Gervaisy's working hard as a washerwoman, and because they've been able to put a little money away, she gets the idea that she is going to open her own washing business. This is amazing. She's a poor person, but she thinks she has the aptitude to open her own business. And of course, the sister-in-law, the brother-in-law are scandalized. Oh, who does she think she is, opening her own business? She'll be lording it over all of us. She'll be the queen of the district. No, it's just a washing business. It's like 3 women boiling clothes, ironing them with starch. And they have, I think they have like 12 irons that are all sitting on top of the fire. And they use the iron while it's hot. And once eventually the iron gets too cold, they have to put it back on the fire and exchange that for another hotter iron. It's really a bit of a history lesson when you read this novel. But before she can open the shop, everything's looking up. Coupeau, the roofer, manages to fall off one of the roofs that he's working on. Doesn't kill him. I thought it would, I really did, but survives. And he spends the next 6 months convalescing at home. Doesn't go to the hospital. Gervaise wants to take care of her man. And she does, even though it costs her quite a lot of money to be looking after him 24 hours a day, but she does because she loves him. He doesn't actually need 6 months convalescence. He could probably get up and about after 4 months, but she tells him to rest. And during this 6 months recovery period, he gets a little bit lazy. He loses his industrious spirit. He gets a taste for the idle life. He likes not working. And even when he does recover and he's able to get out, she gives him a little money, and some days he just goes to the pub with his friends because he's just not ready for work yet. Unfortunately, that is kind of the end of the good Coupeau, that he gets this laziness, later on turns into degeneracy, because she coddles him, tells him not to go to work. And some days he does go to work, but he will go to the building site, he'll look, everybody going in, early in the morning, the sun's just come up, and then he sees over there the pub, and he sees all of those ne'er-do-wells in the pub drinking. And he thinks, oh, maybe today I'll do that. I'll go in there and talk to them and see what's on their mind. Maybe I'll have a couple of wines, but I won't drink any spirits. Let me read you something. And if it was hinted that Coupeau seemed quite fit now and could perfectly well go back to work, she protested, no, not yet. She didn't want to have him back in bed again. She knew what the doctor had told her, didn't she? She was the one who prevented him from going to work by repeating every morning that he must take his time and not force the pace. She even slipped him the odd franc piece now and again into his waistcoat pocket. Coupeau accepted this as quite natural, and he complained of all sorts of ills so as to be coddled. 6 months later, his convalescence was still going on. Now, on the days he went to watch other people working, he would enjoy going in and having a drink with the boys. After all, it was nice and comfortable there in the bar. They had a bit of fun together and only stayed about 5 minutes. Didn't hurt anybody, did it? Just as though a glass of wine ever killed anybody. But he slapped himself on the chest and made it a point of honor to drink nothing but wine. Always wine and never spirits. Wine made you live longer. Didn't upset you and didn't make you drunk. But the fact remained that more than once, at the end of whole days of idleness spent on one building site after another and bar after bar, he came home a bit the worse for wear. And on those days, Gervaise shut the door, alleging a bad headache, but really so as to prevent the Gougettes from hearing Coupeau's silly chatter. His recovery from the fall off the roof kind of ruins the man. And there's one extra line I want to read on the next page. In particular, what she could not forgive was his having refused to learn to read during his convalescence. Her son had offered to show him how, but the other had told him to go to hell, saying that studying made people thin. Doesn't want to learn to read because, all that brain exercise makes you thin. However, Gervaise is very industrious, she's very hardworking. She does open up her laundry, and she does begin to make some money, and it makes the sister-in-law absolutely sick to know that her worthless brother and his worthless wife are more successful business-wise and money-wise than they are. Right at the end of this 150 pages, where I'm going to stop telling you about the plot, Gervaise, to celebrate her good fortune, and because it's a special day in the calendar, They plan this dinner party, and it's going to be the dinner party that the whole district is going to be speaking about for the next 5 years at least. They are going to have all of the best food they can imagine. It was really such a pleasure for me to read this because it's so nice when poor people are dreaming, if we could eat food like the wealthy people eat, how they can manage it and how many courses they will have. And quite a large section is they're talking about buying a goose, a fat goose. And they go to the local butcher and they are looking at his geese and that's the one over there. That goose looks to be at least, 5-7 pounds, and they're touching the bird, feeling its skin and like, oh, that bird is full of fat. That's the one we're going to buy. And they buy this goose and they bring it home alive. And I guess it's sort of living with them for a few weeks while they're preparing this feast. It's incredible. This lavish dinner party that goes on for hours and hours and page after page after page. That's really the culmination of the happy part of the book. And because you're literature people, the Wheel of Fortune. When people go up, they don't always keep going up, do they? Things begin to go badly for Gervaise for a few reasons. Coupeau begins, as I mentioned, he gets lazy, gets a bit of a taste for drinking in the pub with the boys, and Lantier comes back. And I think that's all I'm going to tell you. If the book's 400 pages and I've told you about the first 150 pages, well, what's left? Quite a lot. Not too much of it is particularly happy. It was a hard book for me to read because there was this big spoiler, which I guess I'll just tell you about it right now, okay? So let me read the blurb about this book. This would normally what would be on the back to give you a little hint as to the plot, but not to spoil the entire story for you. I'll read it. The 7th novel, according to the publication, not according to the reading, in the Rougon Macquart cycle, L'Assommoir, 1877, is the story of a woman's struggle for happiness in working-class Paris. At the center of the story stands Gervaise, who starts her own laundry and for a time makes a success of it. As I say. But her husband soon squanders her earnings in the Assommoir, a local drinking spot, and gradually the pair sink into poverty and squalor. That gives you a sense of where it's going. Yes, but it doesn't tell you how or why. It just gives you the gist, right? So I was reading my edition, and I got about 100 pages in, and I realized, hey, I've never read the back. And I'm going to read the back to you now. Cover your ears or click ahead. Vividly, without romantic illusions, Zola uses the coarse argot of the back streets to plot the descent of the easygoing Gervaise through idleness, drunkenness, promiscuity, filth, and starvation to the grave. It tells you she dies in the end. Ain't that some shit? Uncover your ears now. I'm a literature guy. I don't hope for happy endings, although I like the idea that they might surprise me with one, right? But to know from the first 25% of the book exactly the direction it's headed, that was a bit hard to take. It's still quite enjoyable all the way to the end. I don't know what to say. The bleakness is inherent, I suppose. Now, this is the 3rd novel by Zola that I've read. The first one was The Masterpiece, the second one was Germinal, and this is L'Assommoir. It just happens that L'Assommoir, Gervaise, I said she has 2 sons, Claude and Etienne. It's fantastic luck. Claude is the protagonist of The Masterpiece. Etienne is the protagonist of Germinal. So I read those in the last 2 years, and now suddenly I'm reading the book about their mother. And suddenly I'm beginning to see all of the connections that Zola had, this enormous family tree that he was plotting for this great series. And I really feel I should stop reading books from the end of the series because I'm cheating myself. I need to read books 1 to 10 and then 11 to 20 to get the entire scope, to be reading the books L'Assommoir is book 13, The Masterpiece is book number 14, and Germinal is book number 15. So I've read 13, 14, and 15 out of a 20 novel series. I really feel like I'm cheating myself a little bit by reading these volumes before all of the others. However, it is nice for me to suddenly make these connections, like, oh, this is the mother, these are her boys, to begin to see everything that is going to be coming next. I love this 19th century French writing. Stark, it's bleak, very dirty. Oh my goodness, it is dirty from top to bottom. Poverty levels are just unbelievable. Actually, one of the amazing things in this story is that there are a lot of children, but none of them go to school. Neither of her two boys, Claude and Etienne, they don't go to school. Just eventually they become 13 years old. They look and they try to see some aptitude about, what they are interested in. Claude looks like he might be a bit of a painter, so they send him away to the countryside to study art. Etienne looks like he's got some manual dexterity, so they send him off to the blacksmith, where he works pumping the bellows, but watching the professional smiths trying to learn the trade. And if he applies himself, then he one day will become a blacksmith as well. But no school. There's no mention of it. And the children are mentioned quite a lot because there is a third daughter, Coupeau and Gervaise. They have a daughter named Nana, who gets her own novel. I'm dying to read that one. And it's nice because I've got it. This one is number 17 in the series. But like I said, I feel like I'm reading all of the books from the very end of the series. It's going to make reading the beginning of the series annoying because I will already have all the secrets from the end of the books at the end of this monstrous series. Every book, 470 pages. Every book is a monster. But I can't wait to get to this one because we get quite a lot of Nana's story in L'Assommoir, that she sees her parents. They're both alcoholics, and she wants to escape from them. But she's got no education. Her only skill is that she can make these artificial flowers. But she's beautiful, and even young girls in Paris, in this district, know that counts for quite a lot if they know how to use it. Finally, I would like to say something about the translation. So, translated by Leonard Tancock. This translation is not very good. There are a lot of strange, archaic, British phrases that are just no longer used. Now, I love vocabulary. Proudly, I say that. And I love idiomatic speech. And I realize how impossible it is. Imagine translating the idioms of 1877 Paris slum to modern English. It's nigh impossible. For example, often, an umbrella is called a gamp, G-A-M-P. I know what that means because once upon a time I had to check that in a dictionary. When people are walking quickly and they're getting short of breath, in this book they are getting puffed. I was quite puffed from walking quickly from here to there. And one phrase that is used at least half a dozen times is when they say that something will be done quickly, they use this idiom, it will be done in a brace of shakes. Now, I don't mind all of this idiomatic English because it's sort of fun for me to collect these old phrases. If I can recommend to you that you get a better, more modern translation than this one, I think that would be better for you. Of course, ideally you would read it in French. That would be fantastic. If you're as linguistically challenged as I am, you have to suffer with the English translations. And it's funny because quite a lot of the vocabulary is quite coarse. Surprisingly, for a 150-year-old novel, there's a fair bit of profanity that in North American literature, it's like, even in Hemingway's novels, there's not a great deal of cursing. And this was 50 years earlier than that. Yeah, there's some pretty hard language. The big ones are in there, and it was like, oh my, Zola's really going for it. Because there was controversy when this book was published that it was too crass. We don't want such a bleak, realistic picture of poverty in Paris. And Zola said, well, I'm only showing what real life looks like, you hypocrites. And Zola was perfectly right. This novel is about poor people who are kind, poor people who are generous, poor people who are alcoholic, poor people who are tight-fisted and mean. So that's the thing about Gervaise, is that she's very generous. She's hardworking, but she's quite free and easy with her money. She likes to see her husband having a good time. She doesn't mind that. It's one of the things that brings about the ruin. Just one final thing. It's really quite a shame because it makes me very much want to learn more about French history. Because I don't know who Napoleon III was. I don't know all this talk about the emperor. I don't know about this war that seems to be happening. You know, at one point they're talking to a policeman and they ask him, they said, "Did you kill any Cossacks?" And he looks at them sarcastically and he says, "No, I never killed any Cossacks. I did kill some Bedouin though." And that straight over my head. No idea. Cossacks I can kind of imagine. There used to be a place named Prussia, right? And France had a little war with there was a Franco-Prussian war. But Bedouin, I don't know when they would be killing Bedouin. Turkey? Algiers? Maybe Algiers. The more I read, the more I want to learn about the reality of what actually happened. Please read Emil Zola, L'Assommoir. I'm such a huge fan of Zola. See, I try not to read the same author twice within a year. So it's March the 1st today. I finished that book a few weeks ago. Absolutely loved it, even though the ending is pretty sad, I'd give you that. You can't read a description of this book, even if it's just a few sentences, that doesn't let you know that the ending is not going to be a happy one. Like, I'm crazy to read Nana already, and I've got to be patient. I've got to tell myself, you know, wait. But 2026, it's a very long way away. Have a great day. Read 150-year-old French literature. It will make you feel happy to be alive. Please like and subscribe. There's somebody out in the hallway. They must be literature fans. Listening at the keyhole. Come on, quickly. He's talking about 19th century French literature. God, we don't want to miss that. Completely lost him now.